Listen closely. Do you hear it? That's the sound of desire dying in a suburban kitchen at 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday. It's quieter than you'd expect. Not a scream, but a sigh, like air escaping from a punctured lung. Jung once wrote about a patient who dreamed she was married to death himself. Every morning she'd wake beside him, his cold fingers tracing patterns on her spine, and she'd think, at least he's consistent. The dream wasn't about dying, you see. It was about something far worse. The slow calcification of the soul that happens when love becomes a routine. When passion transforms into a checklist. When the wild animal of desire is domesticated into a house pet that sleeps too much and sheds on the furniture. There's an old Romanian folktale about a woman who fell in love with a wolf. For 7 years, they lived in ecstatic danger, hunting by moonlight, sleeping in caves, their love as raw as torn flesh. Then one winter, she convinced him to live in her cottage. She fed him warm soup, dressed him in wool sweaters, taught him to eat with a spoon. By spring, he'd forgotten how to howl. By summer, he'd forgotten why he ever wanted to. She left him that autumn, not because he'd become cruel, but because he'd become safe. I fell in love with a wolf, she told the village priest, but I woke up married to a dog. This is the first dark truth that men refuse to understand. Women don't leave because you failed. They leave because you've succeeded too well at becoming exactly what you thought they wanted. Picture this. A man works 16-hour days to build the perfect nest. Italian marble countertops, temperature-controlled wine cellar, smart home system that adjusts the lighting to her biorhythms. He presents it to her like a bowerbird showing off his collection of blue objects, certain that comfort equals love, that security equals passion. But comfort is where desire goes to die. Security is passion's funeral shroud. A 2024 study from the Institute of Relationship Dynamics found that women in highly stable relationships reported 73% lower levels of erotic satisfaction than those in relationships marked by what researchers delicately termed constructive uncertainty. The researchers seemed puzzled. They shouldn't have been. Eroticism feeds on the unknown, the dangerous, the not quite captured. You cannot seduce what you own. You cannot pursue what already sleeps in your bed every night, mouth slightly open, drooling on the Egyptian cotton pillowcases you bought to make her happy. Here's what happy men don't understand. The same hands that build a cage of comfort are the hands that lock it. Every "I've got this handled" is another bar. Every "don't worry about it, honey" is another lock. You think you're protecting her, but you're actually embalming her and yourself in a tomb built from good intentions and predictable Saturdays. Kierkegaard understood this. He wrote about the sickness unto death, not physical death, but the death that comes from too much safety, too much certainty, too much knowing exactly what tomorrow will bring. It's the death of possibility. And possibility, my friend, is the oxygen that feeds the flame of desire. I knew a man once, successful surgeon, devoted husband, who came home every day at exactly 6:15 p.m. His wife could set her watch by the sound of his key in the lock. He'd kiss her on the same spot on her forehead, ask about her day while sorting through mail, pour exactly 2 fingers of whiskey, and settle into his leather chair to read medical journals. He loved her with the dedication of a monk tending a garden, steady, reliable, unchanging. She left him for a traveling musician who forgot her birthday, slept in his van, and played guitar with fingers that smelled like cigarettes and other women's perfume. When the surgeon asked her why, she said, "With you, I knew every sunset before it happened. With him, I don't even know if the sun will rise." The grave where passion sleeps isn't dug by cruelty or neglect. It's dug by the slow, methodical shoveling of routine, every date night penciled into a shared calendar, every anniversary celebrated at the same restaurant, every Sunday morning that unfolds exactly like the last one, until time becomes not a river, but a stagnant pond where nothing new can grow. Tell me something, and be honest with yourself here, in the darkness where no one can see you flinch. When was the last time you surprised yourself in your own relationship? When was the last time you felt that electric uncertainty, that delicious danger of not knowing exactly how the night would end? If you can't remember, then you're already standing at the edge of passion's grave, shovel in hand, dirt under your fingernails. The cruelest irony? The very stability you worked so hard to create, the very happiness you fought to maintain, becomes the mausoleum where love's wild spirit goes to decompose into something safe and sanitary and utterly sexless. You become the reliable narrator of a story she's heard too many times, in a voice that's lost its power to make her pulse quicken. Women leave happy men not because they want to be unhappy, but because they want to be alive. And aliveness requires risk. It requires the possibility of failure, of heartbreak, of not knowing what comes next. It requires the wolf, not the dog. The storm, not the climate-controlled environment. The question, not the answer. So here you sit, in your perfectly ordered life, wondering why her eyes look through you instead of at you, why her body turns away in sleep, why she stares out windows with the expression of a prisoner counting days. You've given her everything except the one thing she actually needs, the beautiful uncertainty of not knowing whether you'll catch her when she falls. The longer you stare, the less of you it reflects. There's a mirror in Prague, they keep it covered now, that once belonged to a countess who spent 40 years staring into it, searching for the girl her husband fell in love with. By the end, visitors swore the mirror showed not her reflection, but his. What she'd twisted herself into, feature by borrowed feature, until even her own bones forgot their original shape. This is the second poison men unknowingly pour into love's chalice. They create a reflection instead of meeting a person. They fall in love with their own projection, bouncing off her surface like light off polished glass, never realizing they're having a relationship with themselves. Jung called it the anima, the feminine aspect of the male psyche, projected onto actual women like a film reel onto a blank screen. Men don't see the woman in front of them. They see their mother's comfort, their first love's abandonment, their father's expectations, their own desperate need to be seen as worthy. She becomes a walking mirror for their unresolved psychology, and then they wonder why she shatters. I'll tell you a secret that will make your skin crawl. Every time you've said, "You complete me," you've actually said, "You don't exist." Because completion implies she's not a whole person, but a missing piece of your puzzle, a supplement to your insufficiency, a band-aid for your existential wound. There was a psychological experiment in 2023. They had to stop it after 3 months because the results were too disturbing. Men were asked to describe their partners in detail: personality, dreams, fears, childhood memories. Then the researchers interviewed the women. The overlap? 12%. Well, the men had created elaborate fantasies, beautiful fictions that had almost nothing to do with the actual women sharing their beds. One man described his wife as gentle and nurturing, never angry. She was a former boxer who kept a punching bag in the garage and screamed at hockey games. But here's where it gets truly dark. The women knew. They'd spent years watching their real selves disappear behind their partner's projections, becoming ghosts haunting their own relationships. One woman said, "He loves someone who looks like me, sounds like me, but isn't me. I'm not sure that person ever existed outside his imagination. Schopenhauer wrote that we're all walking around in a dream of our own making, bumping into other dreamers, never truly awake. But in relationships, it's worse. Men create a shared dream and insist their partners live inside it. Like forcing someone to act in a play they didn't audition for, reading lines they didn't write, wearing costumes that don't fit. You think you're being romantic when you say she's your dream girl, but dreams are for sleeping. Reality is for living. And reality includes her rage, her disappointments, her secret thoughts at 3 a.m. that have nothing to do with you. Reality includes the parts of her that exist entirely outside your perception. The self she is when you're not watching. The thoughts she thinks in languages you don't speak. A man once told me his wife left him out of nowhere. They'd been happy, he insisted. No fights, no problems. Perfect harmony. I asked him what she'd been reading lately. He didn't know. What she worried about? He couldn't say. What she wanted to be when she was 7 years old, before the world told her what girls should want. Silence. He knew her coffee order, her dress size, her allergies. But he didn't know her. He knew his idea of her, and he'd loved that idea so hard, so completely, that the real woman suffocated beneath it. This is what men don't understand about women leaving happy relationships. She's not leaving because you've made her unhappy. She's leaving because you've made her invisible. Your happiness has erased her like fog on a mirror, and she needs to find somewhere she can see her own face again. The ancient Greeks had a word, pseudo-parthenos, the false virgin. It described women who performed innocence to match men's fantasies, hiding their knowledge, their experience, their power. Modern women do something similar, but deeper. They perform entire personalities, shape-shifting to match their partner's projections until they forget which face is real. A 2025 neurological study found that women in long-term relationships showed decreased activity in brain regions associated with self-recognition when shown photos of themselves. They literally stopped recognizing themselves. The researchers called it identity dissolution through relational mirroring. I call it soul murder by 1,000 accommodations. Here's the test, and most of you will fail it. Can you name 3 things about your partner that have nothing to do with you? 3 interests, fears, or dreams that exist entirely outside your shared life? If you're struggling, then you're not in love with a woman. You're in love with a mirror that's learned to smile back. The most grotesque part? Women participate in their own erasure. They diet themselves into your fantasy. Laugh at jokes they don't find funny. Pretend to enjoy your hobbies. Swallow their opinions like bitter pills. They become method actors who never break character, until one day they wake up and realize they've forgotten who they were before the performance began. I once watched a couple at a restaurant. He ordered for her. She'll have the salmon. She loves salmon. While she sat silent, fingers wrapped around her water glass like it was a lifeline. Later in the bathroom, I heard her on the phone. I fucking hate salmon. I've hated it for 15 years, but it makes him happy to think he knows what I love. When tell me, in this moment of uncomfortable truth, do you actually know the woman you claim to love? Or do you know the character she plays in the movie you're directing? When she disagrees with you, do you listen? Or do you explain to her why she doesn't really mean it? When she changes, do you celebrate her evolution? Or do you mourn the loss of who you thought she was? Women leave happy men because happiness built on erasure is just sophisticated loneliness. Because being unknown by someone who claims to love you is worse than being alone. Because the mirror that lies eventually cracks. And when it does, she sees not your reflection anymore, but the stranger she's become. The tragedy isn't that you don't love her. It's that you love someone who doesn't exist. and she's tired of pretending to be that ghost. Desire is a cannibal that starts with its own tail. In Tibet, there's a demon called a preta, a hungry ghost with a mouth the size of a needle and a stomach the size of a mountain. It spends eternity trying to eat, but no amount of food can pass through that tiny opening fast enough to fill the vast emptiness inside. The monks say it's not a monster, it's a mirror. It shows us what we become when we mistake hunger for love. This is the third dark truth that gnaws at the foundation of every relationship. Men's desire isn't for the woman, it's for the wanting itself. They're not in love with her, they're addicted to the ache of needing her. And like any addiction, it requires ever-increasing doses to achieve the same high. Jung understood that what we call falling in love is often just the ego's desperate attempt to escape its own prison through another person. But here's what he didn't tell his comfortable Victorian patients. The escape is temporary. The prison is portable. You carry it with you into every relationship, and eventually, she becomes just another wall. I knew a man who collected women like rare butterflies. Not sexually. That would have been simpler, more honest. He collected their attention, their desire, their emotional investment. He'd pursue with the intensity of a medieval knight, writing poetry, planning elaborate surprises, staying up all night just to watch them sleep. But the moment they fully turned toward him, the moment their love became certain and available, something in him would curdle like milk in heat. It's like a death, he told me once, drunk on wine and his own confusion. The moment she says, "I'm yours," she stops being the person I wanted. She becomes furniture. A 2024 study on what researchers called attachment paradox found that men who reported the highest levels of romantic intensity also showed the highest levels of relationship dissolution. The very quality that made them seem like passionate lovers, that desperate, consuming need, was actually a symptom of something darker. They weren't seeking connection. They were seeking the perfect fix for an unfillable void. This is what Kierkegaard meant when he wrote about the aesthetic stage of existence. Living for the peaks, the moments of intensity, unable to tolerate the valleys where actual life happens. These men are emotional adrenaline junkies, and women are their drug of choice. But every drug loses its potency. Every high becomes harder to reach. And eventually, she stops being medicine and becomes just another reminder of the emptiness that no amount of external validation can fill. Here's a thought that should disturb you. How many of your past relationships ended not because something was wrong, but because everything was right? Because comfort felt like death? Because her availability made you feel trapped by your own success at winning her? The hungry ghost manifests in 1,000 ways. The man who needs constant reassurance that he's desired, turning his partner into a 24-hour validation dispensary. The one who creates drama to feel alive, picking fights just to experience the intensity of reconciliation. The one who flirts with other women not because he wants them, but because he needs to see that flicker of jealousy in his partner's eyes. Proof that he still matters, that he can still cause pain, that he exists. There's an old Jewish parable about a man who complained to his rabbi that his wife had become boring. The rabbi gave him special glasses that would make her appear new and exciting again. For a week, the man was ecstatic. His wife seemed like a different woman every day. Then the glasses broke, and he saw the truth. His wife hadn't changed at all. The glasses had been ordinary glass. The only thing that had changed was his belief that she might be someone else. This is the cannibalistic nature of male desire. It feeds on potential, not reality. On the maybe, not the is. On the chase, not the catch. And once caught, the woman becomes evidence of his own emptiness. Proof that even getting what he wanted couldn't fill the hole inside him. Women sense this hunger like animals sense earthquakes. They feel themselves being consumed, not loved. They realize they're not partners, but prey, not companions, but consumables. And they know, with that bone-deep knowing that comes from centuries of survival, that the only way to stop being eaten is to leave the table. A woman told me once, he didn't love me. He loved the way I made him feel about himself. I was a mirror that showed him as desirable, worthy, alive. But mirrors don't have feelings. Mirrors don't need reciprocation. When I stopped reflecting and started expecting, he looked at me like I'd betrayed him. The most pathetic part? These hungry men think they're romantic. They mistake intensity for depth, need for love, consumption for connection. They write songs about their hunger as if it's beautiful, not knowing they're composing funeral dirges for every relationship they touch. Schopenhauer said that life swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. But he was wrong. It swings between hunger and the terrible realization that being full feels exactly like being empty, just heavier. So ask yourself, in the quiet honesty of this moment, do you love her? Or do you love the feeling of wanting her? Do you seek her presence, or the high of winning her attention? Are you building something together? Or are you just feeding a hunger that grows larger with every meal? Because here's the final twist of the knife. The women always know. They know when they're being loved and when they're being consumed. They know the difference between a partner and a parasite. And eventually, they choose starvation over being slowly digested by someone else's endless need. The hungry ghost never gets full. It just finds new things to devour. And women? They're tired of being the meal. Every performance deserves an empty audience. In 1847, a Danish theater company performed to completely empty seats for 3 months straight. The actors, convinced that invisible audiences were the most appreciative, gave their finest performances to chairs that would never applaud. They only stopped when one of them went mad, claiming he could hear the ghosts crying. But here's the thing. He wasn't crazy. He'd simply understood what every man in a performative relationship refuses to see. Playing a role for too long makes you forget you're acting. This is the fourth poison that curdles in love's veins. Men perform strength, competence, and invulnerability with such dedication that they become strangers to their own souls. And women? They're exhausted from pretending to believe in a show they never asked to attend. Jung wrote about the persona, the mask we wear in public. But he was too polite to mention what happens when you sleep in that mask, make love in that mask, argue in that mask, until your actual face atrophies from disuse. Modern men haven't just adopted personas, they've had them surgically attached. I'll paint you a picture that might feel uncomfortably familiar. A man comes home from work, jaw clenched from swallowing his boss's disrespect. His partner asks how his day was. "Fine," he says, pouring whiskey with hands that won't quite stop shaking. Everything's under control. She watches him perform confidence while his eyes scream for help, and she thinks, "I'm living with a ghost who insists he's alive." A 2025 study on emotional labor in heterosexual relationships found something that should terrify every man reading this. Women reported feeling more lonely with their partners present than when actually alone. The reason? They were exhausted from engaging with a performance instead of a person. One participant said, "It's like being married to a WWE wrestler who won't break character. I don't know if I'm talking to my husband or his stage persona. Here's the grotesque comedy of it all. Men think they're protecting their partners by hiding their vulnerabilities. They think they're being strong by never admitting fear, doubt, or confusion. But what they're actually doing is forcing women into a one-person show where she has to play both parts, the one who needs support and the one who provides it, because God forbid the leading man shows a crack in his armor. Nietzsche said we must become who we are. But modern masculinity says we must become who we think they need us to be. The strong provider, the unshakable rock, the problem solver who never has problems, the protector who never needs protection. It's a role written by dead men for an audience that left the theater generations ago. You want to know why women leave happy men? Because happiness built on performance is just well-rehearsed misery. Because watching someone you love pretend to be invulnerable while clearly drowning is a special kind of torture. Because she didn't fall in love with your persona. She fell in love with the glimpses of humanity that leaked through its cracks. There's an ancient Greek story about an actor who played the same tragic hero for so many years that he forgot his real name. One day, his wife found him at dawn, still in costume, weeping over fake deaths and fictional betrayals. When she tried to comfort him, he pushed her away. "You don't understand," he said. "These tears are the only real thing about me." Modern men are living this myth. They've performed having it all together for so long that falling apart feels like death. They've acted strong until they can't remember what weakness feels like. They've played the role of happy, successful man until their actual emotions become strangers knocking at a door they're too terrified to open. I knew a CEO, brilliant, successful, married to a woman who loved him with the desperation of someone watching a suicide in slow motion. He had panic attacks in his BMW before walking into his own home. Why? Because home was where he had to perform the most. At work, he could be a bastard. With friends, he could be competitive. But at home, he had to be the perfect husband. And the script was killing him. She left him not because he failed, but because she couldn't bear to watch him succeed at destroying himself. "I didn't want a performance," she told me later. "I wanted a partner. I wanted someone who could fall apart in my arms without apologizing. I wanted the man I glimpsed at 3 a.m. when his guard was down and he'd forgotten his lines." Here's the question that should haunt you. When was the last time you let her see you afraid, not performatively vulnerable in that calculated way men do? Let me share this carefully curated weakness that actually makes me look stronger. Really afraid, uncertain, lost, human. Because here's what the Hollow Kings don't understand. Women don't want to be protected from your humanity. They want to be trusted with it. They don't need you to be invulnerable. They need you to be real. The performance you think keeps them safe and is actually what drives them away. Not because it's too much, but because it's not enough. It's not you. The theater is empty because the audience got tired of watching a man perform his own life instead of living it. She didn't leave because the show was bad. She left because she wanted a relationship, not a season pass to your one-man tragedy. And you? You're still on stage, delivering lines to an audience of none, wondering why the applause stopped, too committed to the role to realize the play ended years ago. What you refuse to prune will strangle what you claim to love. There's a chateau in the Loire Valley where nothing grows anymore. The last gardener, obsessed with preserving his first rose bush, refused to cut away the dead growth. "It was perfect once," he'd say, watering brittle stems. The living roses, starved of light and space, withered in the shadow of what used to be beautiful. They found him one winter morning, frozen to the ground, still clutching dead thorns that had pierced through his gloves and into his palms. He'd bled out slowly, protecting something that had been dead for years. This is the fifth darkness men carry into love. They're archaeologists of dead affection, curators of expired dreams, guards at the museum of what used to be. They tend relationships like taxidermists, trying to stuff and mount what should have been allowed to decompose naturally. Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. But there's another shadow, more insidious. The shadow of dead love that men drag behind them like Jacob Marley's chains. Every unprocessed breakup, every unresolved resentment, every fantasy of the one who got away. They're all there, rattling in the dark, making it impossible for new love to take root. I'll tell you something that will feel like swallowing glass. The reason she leaves isn't because you don't love her enough. It's because you love too many ghosts. Your bed is crowded with the corpses of former desires, and she's tired of competing with women who exist only in the amber of your memory. A 2024 psychological study on romantic residue found that men take, on average, 3 times longer than women to psychologically process the end of relationships. But here's the truly damning part. 67% never fully process them at all. They simply layer new relationships over old wounds, like painting over water damage and wondering why the walls keep rotting. There's a man I know, successful, charming, married 4 times. Each wife was a reaction to the last. The second was everything the first wasn't. The third, a correction to the second's corrections. The fourth, an attempt to recreate the first with improvements. He collects wives like a child collecting dolls, never realizing he's still trying to win an argument with a woman who left him 30 years ago. This is what Kierkegaard meant by repetition, the doomed attempt to recreate a past that never existed as perfectly as we remember it. Men don't move forward in love. They spiral. Each relationship a funhouse mirror reflection of unfinished business. Each woman asked to heal wounds she didn't inflict. But it's worse than simple comparison. It's the active refusal to let the past die. The drunk texts to exes. The hidden photos in phone folders marked taxes. The casual mentions of someone I used to know that carry more weight than wedding vows. The way certain songs, certain restaurants, certain phrases are forever tainted, off limits, sacred to a ghost who doesn't even remember your name. Women feel this. They sense the crowded room, the divided attention, the way you look through them sometimes, seeing someone else. They know when they're competing with a memory, and memories never age, never disappoint, never have bad breath or bad moods. Memories are always 23 and laughing in the rain. Reality is 35 and asking you to take out the garbage. Here's a truth that should make you uncomfortable. Every woman who left you is still in your current relationship. Not physically, but psychologically. In the way you flinch when she raises her voice, because Sarah used to scream. In the way you buy flowers every Friday, because Emma said you never did. In the way you refuse to argue, because fighting with Jessica nearly killed you. You're not responding to the woman in front of you. You're responding to a composite of every woman who ever shared your bed. The Japanese have a word, tsukumogami, for objects that develop souls after existing for 100 years. But dead love develops souls much faster. Those roses you refuse to prune don't just die. They transform into something else. Something that whispers poison into every new beginning. Something that turns fresh soil into a graveyard. A woman once told me, he kept comparing me to his ex. Not out loud, but in 1,000 tiny ways. The way he'd tense when I wore red, she wore red. The way he'd suggest restaurants, then cancel last minute, they went there. The way he'd say my name sometimes like it was the wrong shape in his mouth. I realized I wasn't his girlfriend. I was an understudy in a play about his past. The Garden of Dead Roses isn't just about exes. It's about the relationship you have with your current partner that died years ago, but neither of you held the funeral. The version of her you fell in love with at 25. The version of you she married at 30. The dreams you shared before life showed you its teeth. You're both walking through a garden, tending dead things, pretending the smell is perfume and not decay. So here's my question, and answer it honestly in the darkness where no one can judge. What are you still watering that died years ago? What ghost are you feeding with attention that belongs to the living? What dead rose are you bleeding for while the living woman beside you withers from neglect? Because here's the final cruelty. She's not leaving because you love someone else. She's leaving because you love something else. The past, the fantasy, the corpse of what used to be. And she's tired of being haunted by your ghosts. Tired of competing with memories. Tired of living in a garden where nothing new can grow because you won't stop tending the dead. The chateau in the Loire, they burn it down every spring now. The locals say it's the only way to keep the ghosts from returning. Maybe it's time you lit a match. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let her hate you. In the mountains of Nepal, there's a ritual called sky burial. They leave the dead on mountaintops for vultures to consume. The monks say it's the ultimate act of generosity, giving your body back to the world, letting what remains become wings. The families don't watch. They understand that transformation requires privacy, that resurrection is too ugly for witnesses. This is the final truth, the one that tastes like liberation and ash. The best thing that ever happened to her was you letting her go. Not because you were terrible, but because holding on was killing you both. Sometimes love's greatest act is its own dissolution. Jung wrote that individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires separation. But he was too Swiss, too careful to say what that really means. Sometimes you have to let someone hate you so they can love themselves. Sometimes you have to be the villain in their story so they can finally be the hero in their own. I need you to understand something that goes against every romantic comedy you've ever swallowed. Her leaving wasn't a failure. It was graduation. It was a bird discovering it had wings. It was a woman realizing that the cage was unlocked the whole time. She just had to stop asking permission to fly. A 2025 study on post-relationship identity reconstruction found something beautiful hidden in the data. Women who left stable, happy relationships showed markers of psychological growth comparable to survivors of near-death experiences. They didn't just recover. They transformed. They became people they couldn't have become inside the relationship, no matter how happy it was. One woman described it like this: leaving him was like breaking my own bones to reset them properly. Everything hurt. Everything was wrong. But for the first time in years, I could feel my own skeleton. Here's what men don't understand about women leaving. It's not about finding someone better. It's about finding themselves. The self that got buried under years of compromise. The self that learned to speak in whispers so as not to disturb his peace. The self that forgot what her own laughter sounded like when it wasn't a response to his jokes. There's an ancient Greek word, ecstasis, which means to stand outside yourself. We translate it as ecstasy, but it originally meant something more profound. The moment when you step outside the container of who you've been and see, for the first time, who you might become. Women in happy relationships rarely experience ecstasis. They're too busy being who they've agreed to be. But when she leaves, when she finally walks out that door you thought she'd never find, that's when the magic happens. Not despite the pain, but because of it. The pain is the price of transformation. The loneliness is the cocoon. The guilt is the old skin being shed. I know men who check their ex's social media obsessively, looking for signs of regret, hoping to see her miserable without them. But what they see instead disturbs them more than tears would. She's different, not just happy, transformed. She cut her hair or grew it out, started painting or stopped pretending to like his music, moved to a city she'd always dreamed of, or finally stayed still. She became someone he doesn't recognize, and that's exactly the point. Nietzsche said we must become who we are. But sometimes we can only become who we are by leaving who we were. And who we were is often tangled up with who we were with. She didn't leave you because you were bad. She left because staying was keeping her from becoming. This is the liberation of the abandoned. In letting her hate you, you give her the gift of not having to be grateful. In becoming the villain, you free her from the prison of politeness. In accepting the role of mistake, you allow her to stop justifying her choice and start living it. The monks who perform sky burials say the dead don't need graves. They need sky. The women who leave happy men don't need closure. They need space. Space to spread out. Space to make mistakes that aren't relative to yours. Space to discover what they actually like when they're not trying to like what you like. And here's the twist that might actually heal you. Your pain is part of the gift. Your loneliness is her freedom. Your confusion is her clarity. Every night you spend wondering what went wrong. She spends discovering what might go right. You're not suffering for nothing. You're the mountain she had to climb to see the view from the top. So maybe, just maybe, the kindest thing you ever did was fail to keep her. Maybe your inability to see her was exactly what she needed to finally see herself. Maybe your happy relationship was the cocoon, and her leaving was the wings. The vultures that consume the dead in sky burials are considered sacred. They transform ending into flight, flesh into freedom. Perhaps it's time to stop seeing yourself as abandoned and start seeing yourself as the sacred ground where her transformation began. She doesn't hate you, not really. She's grateful. But she can only be grateful from a distance, from the height she couldn't reach while standing beside you. And that gratitude? It looks exactly like forgetting your name. The liberation of the abandoned isn't yours, it's hers. And the most profound love you can offer now is to let her story continue without you. To let her become unrecognizable. To let her fly so far from who she was with you that even memory can't follow. Some transformations require privacy. Some resurrections need witnesses to leave the room. Your absence isn't punishment. It's the space where her new self learns to breathe. Let her hate you if she needs to. Let her paint you as the dragon in her fairy tale. Let her friends toast to your failures. Because every curse she speaks is a chain breaking. Every complaint is a declaration of independence. Every "he never understood me" is her finally understanding herself. The abandoned think they've lost. But loss is just another word for space. And space is where all becoming happens. In the emptiness where she used to be, you might finally find room to become yourself too. Not the performer, not the provider, not the projection screen, but whatever remains when all the roles have been stripped away. The vultures have taken what needed to die. What remains? That's the question worth answering. Not, how do I get her back? But, who am I when I'm not trying to be someone's everything? The liberation of the abandoned is realizing that abandonment is just another word for freedom. Hers, and if you're brave enough to claim it, yours.